Week 15 of the fantasy football season. And here's a few wide receivers. I have his sleepers this week. The first guy, Elijah Moore of the New York Jets. So right now, Elijah Moore with Mike White, he's starting to get things going once again, like we saw from him late last season when Mike White was in there for a few ball games. So the last few games here for Elijah Moore. Week 12 versus Chicago in that one. 2 catches, 64 yards, a touchdown. Week 13 at Minnesota, only 2 catches, 7 yards, but he did have 6 targets. And then last week at Buffalo in Week 14, 6 catches, 60 yards on 10 targets. So this week here, a good matchup versus the Detroit Lions. I give up the third most fantasy points to wide receivers on the season here. Mike White, we know he likes to drop back and throw that football 30, 40 times a week here. Elijah Moore is a good playmaker. And like I said, last season, both these guys had good chemistry. And this week here versus a weak Lions secondary in a possible potential shootout, I think Moore's a decent sleeper option and a guy available right now in 65% of fantasy leagues. The next guy's another Moore, Chris Moore of the Houston Texans. So he had his breakout game last week versus the Dallas Cowboys. Was Chris Moore. Right now, this Texan team, they want to see what they have for the future. They got a bunch of draft picks and probably going to have the number 1 pick overall unless they start winning ball games. And this week here versus the Kansas City Chiefs, they're going to be chasing points early and often. Brandon Cooks this season, he hasn't been good at all. He's been banged up. Nico Collins, he's had a couple decent games. He's banged up as well a little bit. And Chris Moore's been seeing more snaps and getting more targets. The last few games here for him, Week 12 at Miami, 2 catches, 7 yards. Week 13 versus the Browns, 3 catches, 46 yards. And Week 14, the monster game at the Cowboys, 10 catches, 124 yards on 11 targets. So the Chiefs do give up the 4th most points to wide receivers. They're going to be chasing points early and often is this Texan game. And another good thing, obviously, it's an indoor game in Houston. So right now, available in 93% of fantasy leagues. I got Chris Moore as a sleeper. And the third and final wide receiver I have as a sleeper this week's Paris Campbell of the Indianapolis Colts. So Paris Campbell, he's out there in tons of fantasy leagues as well, in 65% of leagues. And we've seen some pop games out of him, even though over the last few weeks, he really hasn't put up the numbers. Week 11 versus Philly, 5 catches, 67 yards. Week 12 versus the Steelers, 2 catches, 14 yards. And Week 13 at Dallas, 4 catches, 43 yards. So this week, after coming off the bye in Week 14, a good matchup on paper at the Minnesota Vikings. That give up the 2nd most points to wide receivers. And we even saw it last week. Amon St. Brown, monster game. DJ Chark, a good game. And Josh Reynolds even found the end zone as well. So right now, Paris Campbell, he's a speed guy, a good possession receiver with Matt Ryan, even though I think this Minnesota defense is going to do a number for the most part here, because this Colt offensive line, one of the worst lines in the league, and Matt Ryan's been a turnover machine as well this season. But right now, Paris Campbell, definitely a guy I think you could use in a pinch, and we could see a lot of garbage time from him as well. So that's a few wide receivers I have his sleepers here for Week 15 of the fantasy football season.